we'll call this meeting to order at 5:03. Can we get a roll call, please?
Director Gould is absent. Director Costa.
Present.
Thank you.
All right, now we're at the public opportunity to discuss matters of public interest within the committee's scope, including items on or not on the agenda. Do we have any speakers? Not one. Wow. Okay.
Director, do you want me to check online?
Yes, please. Can you check?
Attendees, you have the opportunity to present to the board. If you wish, please raise your hand and I'll give you a chance to unmute. No response.
All right.
No
Thank you.
public comments.
No public comment. All right. So we'll move to the consent agenda. All right, we have a motion. I'll make a second. Can we get a roll call, please?
Yes. Director Sailors. Director Costa.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. So we have an action item. We have the purchasing and contracting policy and Courtney Moore, our purchasing agent. Welcome.
Good evening, directors, Chief Haverty, Board Clerk Ritberg, Chief House. We have a very exciting night ahead of us. What better way to start it than the purchasing and contracting policy review? So I'm sure you noticed there's quite a bit of changes, but really it was mainly cleanup, not changing processes, but just make it an overall more user-friendly document. Just to kind of address a few of the updates that were made, things like making the definitions in alphabetical order, removing some terms that are never referenced within the document, adding some terms that should have been defined that are in the document. A lot of consolidating. You may have noticed that in the old version, there was an informal bid process and a informal proposal process. Those are now consolidated into an informal solicitation process. Same goes for the formal. There was a formal bid process and a formal proposal process, now formal solicitation process. We are also allowed to utilize the exceptions to competitive bidding that Sacramento County does. So those have been included in our policy. There were some old references to old forms, so those were removed. And perhaps the most critical change is just spelling out some of the processes better. Why this is so critical in particular is oftentimes when it comes to federal grant procurements, the grants end up being, or the purchases are audited, and one of the steps that they take is reviewing our purchasing policy. They want to make sure that we followed our policy when using these federal funds. They can't really verify that if our step-by-step process isn't clear. So that is spelled out much better now. And again, just overall makes it a much more user-friendly document for everyone. So those are the main ones. Again, no real process changes, just a lot of cleanup. Any questions?
All right, thank you. Any questions? All right, no questions. Thank you very much for cleaning it up. It looks a great document.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. So if there are no questions, we'll go ahead and since it's an action item, we'll call for a motion. All right, I'll second.
I'll call the roll. Director Sailors. Director Costa.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right, thank you. All right, we've got a couple presentation items. So the first one is the reinstatement policy. Our HR manager, Melissa Maddox. Good evening.
Good evening, directors. Chief Haverty. On behalf of the Human Resources Division, all of whom are here tonight, I just want to express our sincerest gratitude to you for all the support and encouragement you have given us over the last 7 months, and most especially the kindness you have shown us, each and every one of us. We're going to miss your Friday visits, sometimes with treats, just to say hi and ask us if we need anything. So we wish you all the best. Onto the reinstatement policy. The district recognizes the value of long-term employees The majority of our positions don't have a high turnover rate. We have a fairly low turnover rate for the most part. However, from time to time, people may voluntarily leave employment, or they may be released from employment, such as in the academy or on probation, that kind of thing. We wanted to add another piece to this existing policy, not only to be able to restate or reinstate employees, but to be able to rehire employees who don't necessarily voluntarily leave. The current policy did have the reinstatement guidelines for anyone who voluntarily left. So now this is a addition for employees that may not leave on their own free will. We added some guidelines to it for the rehire procedures and processes. So for an example, it would be a situation where a probationary firefighter is released from the academy or on probation, but they were a previous paramedic. And if they got released, say from the academy for fire suppression skills, but not necessarily EMS skills, then they could be recommended to go be rehired back into the paramedic rank. So as an example, and there's other examples too. That's just the one that's most common. That's basically it for all the changes to that, or the additions to that policy. We did meet with 522 and they signed off on it. And it's not a board policy, it's just an administrative policy. So as you know, it doesn't need to go to a full board to approve, but I'm willing to take any questions or comments that you have on revisions.
Please.
I just want to clarify, because now we have the single role program. So what you're saying, if they were let go previously because of their firefighting lack of skills, now they can come back and use their paramedic skills as a paramedic on the single role ambulance program.
Yes.
Okay.
And of course, all the reinstatements or rehires are at the discretion, sole discretion of the fire chief. This just kind of gives us some guidelines to follow as far as, is there an open position? Did they hold the position previously? Are they in good standing with the district? You know, all those kind of things to consider when you're going to do that.
Will we have to redo their background check and all of that, or?
No, well, with the reinstatements in the previous policy, it depends how long they're gone.
Okay.
So if they're gone for, I think, more than a year, they have to redo medical. Okay.
Okay.
But for the rehire piece of it, and you can't be reinstated after more than 5 years, but with the rehire, it has to be within 30 days. So they wouldn't have to do any extra background.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And just to make sure I understood, so it's full discretion of the fire chief.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, our next item is financial planning and budget policy with our CFO, David O'Toole.
Good evening, directors and Fire Chief Haverty, colleagues, members of the public. I also just want to echo for a moment Melissa's sentiments for Fire Chief Haverty, and on behalf of the finance division, at least, we've really treasured your time here and the support you've given us, support you've given me personally, developing professionally. So I greatly appreciate that. You were for me, and I think for finance, the right person at the right time. So, and thank you, actually, board as well for selecting him to be the interim fire chief. I think we're really fortunate. So. Okay, so beginning my presentation, for this item, I'll be presenting a new policy, the financial planning and budget policy. I'm especially pleased to be able to present this to you tonight because I believe this policy will improve transparency and predictability and stability in our budget and budgeting process. This proposal is based on best practices and distinguished award criteria from the Government Finance Officers Association of America and the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers. I'm also indebted to the Orange County Fire Authority, who provided a model that was instructive for this as well. But to get into what the policy does, several things. First off, it defines common and critically important budget terms, such as what is a balanced budget, constant staffing, and operating revenues. For example, a balanced budget is now defined as a budget where operating revenues and any one-time revenues exceed or equal to ongoing operating expenditures. It also memorializes the existing budget development processes and milestones, articulating a timeline and principal steps for the preliminary budget, the final budget, and the mid-year budget. It also describes existing processes and approval levels needed for budget transfers. The policy expresses the district's intent to propose balanced budgets for all funds, specifying that ongoing operating revenues must be greater than or equal to ongoing operating expenditures. The policy includes a statement of intent that the district will build up balances for capital expenditures and accelerated payments for unfunded liabilities, such as payments to SCRS or our OPEB liabilities or PERS liabilities. The policy requires that all known prior year budget adjustments affecting the general fund reserve calculation for that year be recognized in the final budget. This is a shift. For example, constant staffing savings and property tax adjustments that occur in the prior year would have normally been recognized in the mid-year budget, which is 8 months into the fiscal year. We are proposing, and you'll see in the final budget presented in a couple of weeks. Well, those are recognized now, so we're accelerating the recognition of revenues that we know are there, as opposed to waiting 8 months. The policy also articulates how the general fund reserve is calculated, establishing a specific calculation intended to ensure consistency from budget to budget. You may recall discussions in our budget hearings about how that calculation occurs. We've now memorialized it in a way that I think was understood was the way that the board wanted it to go. So, it also limits the expenditure of one-time revenues to non-ongoing expenditures. The policy identifies how any projected general fund reserves over 15%, what we'll call excess reserves, are distributed to 50% to capital, 50% to ongoing debts. It also defines the process for calculating labor costs as a share of revenues, incorporating a definition of operating revenues that includes all general fund transfers and any statutorily driven or expected transfers, which would include transfers in from the IGT funds. That was also a board discussion earlier a couple months ago, memorializing the decision there. Finally, it explains the purpose of the district's 5-year budget forecast, describes when it will be presented and updated, and acknowledges diminishing accuracy in later forecast years. As noted in the agenda, this is an administration policy and presented for informational purposes. So I thank you for your consideration. Welcome any questions.
No.
I've got a couple questions. So I know this is just for information, but will this be coming to the board?
As administrative policy would not normally go to the board, but of course, if you'd like it to, we can.
And you said this is a new policy?
It is new. Yes.
Yeah, I would recommend that it come to the board since it is a new policy. I just think it's important that the board hear and confirm. So I think if we can get that agendized.
Certainly.
And then I reached out to the clerk because there was some reference documents. I think in the future, it'd be helpful for me if we included those reference documents as part of the packet, especially for the board members and then for the public if they so choose to dive into the documents. I think it'd be helpful, but there was 4 reference documents.
Yes.
I did get those documents, but I think just future practice would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Costa, if I may.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to recognize Courtney and Melissa and Dave for these 3 policies. It may seem kind of mundane, more policy, right? But when you're doing the business of the people, I think it's particularly important that we have policies that, one, straighten out some of the hiccups that, we discover as we do business. This 3rd policy that you've just heard from the finance division, I think is very important because we oftentimes mix terms up, and Dave has done a great service to the organization in establishing a glossary, if you will, of terms so that we can all come to one understanding on what we're talking about. And it's like super important to do that. So I just want to recognize all 3 and thank them for their diligent work and those of their staff. These 3 policies are good public business. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you. I do want to just bring up one item. I know it's not on the agenda, but we've had some conversations about. So at the last board meeting, there was a question about policies coming to the committee before the board. And I think I reached out to the clerk about getting a list of policies that require a policy committee review. And so I'd like to request that list. So at least we know ahead of time which policies we need to review and the timing of those policies. So that way we can keep track on that. Does that make sense?
Mhm,
All right.
yes.
All right. Any questions or thoughts on that?
Mm-mm.
All right. Thank you very much. And with that, our next meeting is September 14th. So this adjourns the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.